Undercover boss orders coffee at food court cafe, freezes when he hears the truth about tips. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Story begins. The ones who do the work don't get the tips. The ones in charge take them all. She said it like it was normal, like she had repeated it so many times, it had lost its sting. But that morning, inside the humming food court of Midtown Mall, a man in a faded hoodie and baseball cap stopped with his hand halfway to a coffee cup. His name, though no one there, knew it was Jackson Hale, 52 years old, founder and CEO of Hale Hospitality, a nationwide chain worth hundreds of millions. But today, no one saw that. They only saw a tired customer, sitting alone in the corner. The cafe itself looked ordinary. Neon menu boards buzzing overhead, plastic trays stacked behind the counter, the smell of fryer oil clinging to every surface. Shoppers streamed by with paper bags and chatter, but at the register a different kind of tension filled the air. A young woman in a yellow polo stood stiff, clutching a few crumpled bills. Her eyes darted toward the manager at her side. He was tall, crisp shirt, navy tie, hair slicked back with too much confidence. His gold watch gleamed under the fluorescent lights as his voice cut sharp. "Turn it in. Every dollar. That's policy." The girl's lips trembled, but she obeyed. She slid the money forward. The manager snatched it away without looking at her, slipping it into the register as though it already belonged to him. Jackson didn't move. Not yet. His eyes narrowed, tracing the scene. Around them, customers pretended not to notice. A mother poured soda for her kid. A man scrolled his phone in line. No one interfered. That silence, the practiced kind, told Jackson more than any words. He leaned back, fingers resting on a cheap paper cup. "Busy morning, huh?" he said casually when the girl brought his toast and coffee. She nodded, polite smile failing to mask the truth. "Yeah, morning shifts are tough. And tips? Can't be too bad this time of day." Her pause lasted less than a second, but Jackson caught it. She bent closer, voice dropping beneath the hum of the espresso machine. "Most of us don't see them, only a few do." She glanced toward the register, where the manager and a younger male employee hovered over the touchscreen. Neither carried trays, neither served customers, yet every payment went through their hands. Jackson stirred his coffee slowly, masking the flicker of heat in his chest. The bitter taste wasn't from the drink. Across the floor, the girl kept moving, serving tables with quiet efficiency, balancing plates, refilling soda, clearing trays. Her apron was clean but worn at the edges, her sneakers frayed. Every step spoke of someone who worked harder than anyone around her, yet somehow stayed invisible. The contrast couldn't be sharper. She starved for scraps while the man in the tie wore wealth. When she returned with a fresh napkin for his tray, she hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she slid a small notebook from her apron. Its cover bent, corners soft with use. She set it down near his coffee, like it was nothing more than a receipt. "I just needed to know I wasn't crazy," she whispered. "So I started writing it down." Jackson opened it slowly. Each page carried dates, tables, ticket totals, amount of tip shown on the screen, amount she actually received. Red circles marked the differences. In a single month, she had lost over $600. It wasn't just theft, it was a system. Jackson closed the notebook gently, not with finality but with reverence. His jaw tightened. To anyone else, he was just a weary man taking too long with his coffee. But inside, the CEO had already made his decision. He didn't build Hale Hospitality so families could hand each other power behind closed doors. He built it to reward work. And now he had proof that work was being stolen. He took one last sip, eyes fixed on the register where the manager laughed with the younger man. Then he set the cup down, untouched toast still on the plate. This wasn't breakfast. It was the beginning of an investigation. And by the time it ended, no one in that cafe would ever look at tips or at him the same way again. Jackson stayed longer than he needed to. The toast on his tray was still untouched, but he wasn't here to eat. From his corner seat, he had the perfect line of sight across the cafe. The girl, her name tag read Emily, moved constantly, weaving between tables with an ease that only came from repetition. Coffee refills, clearing plates, carrying trays heavier than her frame should allow. Her apron was faded, threads at the edges pulled loose, but it was clean. Every action said she cared. Near the register, the scene was different. The manager leaned against the counter, posture relaxed, arms folded as though he owned the air around him. Beside him, a younger man, neatly dressed, slicked back hair, stood idly by the POS system. He tapped the screen occasionally, swiping cards, collecting payments. But Jackson noticed something. Neither man touched a tray. Neither carried an order. All the work happened around them, but the money flowed through their hands. That was the crack. And now Jackson began to follow it deeper. A family of 4 finished their meal at a table near the soda fountain. The father slipped a few dollars under the tray, smiling at Emily as she wiped down the table. But when she returned to the counter, the bills never went into her pocket. The manager plucked them first, folding the cash into his own stack, before sliding a smaller amount into the tip jar on display. The rest disappeared. Jackson leaned forward slightly, jotting into the small notebook he carried in his jacket. Dates, times, table numbers, the same way Emily had done in hers. Another moment passed. A trainee, barely 18, stepped toward the POS with an order slip in hand. Her hands shook as she tried to log the order. The younger man at the register gave a smirk, gently pushed her aside, and entered it himself. She forced a polite smile, but the color drained from her face. Jackson caught every detail, the hesitation, the nervous glance toward Emily, the way she returned to the floor without a word. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't laziness. It was something colder, a kind of silence that comes when people know speaking up won't matter. Then Emily passed by Jackson's table again. She placed a napkin down, barely breaking her stride, and murmured low enough for only him to hear. They call it roll access. If your name isn't listed, you don't touch the register. New register, new digital tips. Jackson's jaw tightened. The system was designed for fairness, equal distribution, role-based access. If what she said was true, someone had twisted it deliberately. She returned a minute later, this time with her notebook. She set it down discreetly beside his coffee. Jackson opened it. Each page was lined with red circles and handwritten notes. Dates, ticket totals, digital tips shown on screen, and the small amount she actually received. In less than 4 weeks, she was short over $600. He didn't react outwardly. Not yet. But inside, the CEO had already shifted from silent customer to investigator. As Emily stepped away, Jackson pulled his phone out under the table. He snapped photos of every page of her notebook. Then he scribbled a single line on a folded receipt and slid it into the cover before closing it again. Keep documenting. Don't hand this to anyone else. Wait for me to return. At the register, the younger man, his name stitched onto the shirt. Tyler leaned over the screen again. Jackson caught a glimpse. User role settings. Access level. Advanced. Username. Tyler C. That was no accident. Jackson set his cup down, untouched. He had seen enough for today. The investigation had already begun, and this food court cafe was about to reveal more than its glossy menus ever could. Jackson walked out of the cafe without touching the toast on his tray. From a distance, he blended into the mall crowd, just another man in a hoodie heading toward the exit. But inside, his role had already shifted. He wasn't the stranger at table 7 anymore. He was the CEO, and the investigation had begun. In the parking lot, rain dotted the windshield of his truck. He sat for a moment, watching people pass with shopping bags swinging at their sides, oblivious to what had just unfolded inside. Then he reached for his phone. The number he dialed was one he rarely used, but it always answered. "Mara," he said, voice steady. "Branch 47 has a problem. The POS system is being manipulated. I need you to go in quiet line by line. Every role assignment, every tip account. No alerts, no warnings. Just watch." On the other end, Marilyn didn't waste a breath. Head of internal investigations for 7 years, she had uncovered 3 embezzlement rings without a single headline. She simply said, Understood. That was enough. Within 60 minutes, the terminal inside that cafe was no longer ordinary. To the staff, nothing changed. The touchscreen still lit the same, receipts still printed, the cash drawer still clicked shut. But in the background, silent audit mode had been activated. Every keystroke, every roll change, every adjustment to a tip now left a digital fingerprint that couldn't be erased. The first packet of findings reached Jackson's inbox the next morning. He opened the file on his laptop, still sitting in the truck, the same untouched toast from yesterday crumpled in its bag on the seat beside him. Finding 1. The system contained a hidden row labeled Preferred Internal. Ordinary staff permissions couldn't see it. Only 3 accounts carried the tier: the manager, his nephew Tyler, and a third listed as Kitchen Support 03. Finding 2. Digital tip totals across the branch over the last 30 days came to just under $5,000. Of that, $3,200 more than 65% was routed through Tyler's account. His service volume? Barely 15% of total tables. Finding 3. Payroll showed a part-time kitchen worker named Marcus Hill. He had clock-ins for 21 of the last 25 mornings, but HR had no record of him, no onboarding forms, no tax ID. Marcus Hill did not exist. And then came the final note from finance. Henderson Logistics, LLC, a shell company registered out of state. Every Friday, the branch paid it a fee-marked service processing. On paper, harmless. In reality, the amounts matched the missing tips to the dollar, and the email tied to the registration, an address the manager once used years ago. Jackson closed the laptop slowly. The drizzle outside had turned into steady rain, streaking the glass, blurring the mall's glowing signs. His jaw tightened, but he didn't smile. This wasn't relief. It was confirmation. The system hadn't glitched. It hadn't stumbled. It had been deliberately rewritten. And the man in the tie believed no one would ever look, but someone just had. 3 days later, Jackson walked back into the food court cafe. This time, the hoodie was gone. No baseball cap, no disguise. He wore a simple dark blazer, pressed shirt, steady stride. To the staff, he looked like a different man entirely, but his eyes were the same. Focused. Emily froze when she saw him. She almost dropped the tray in her hands, then caught herself, forcing a small nod. Jackson gave the faintest nod back. Quiet reassurance. Today wasn't about silence anymore. He stepped up to the counter where the manager stood, laughing with a regular, Tyler hovering close behind. Jackson set 2 items down between them: Emily's worn notebook and a slim black folder. The manager barely glanced at them before smirking. "Can I help you, sir?" His tone carried that same superiority as before, like he already knew the answer. Jackson's voice was calm. "You can explain this." He opened the folder, sliding the audit report across the counter. Rows of numbers, role assignments, tip distributions, Tyler's name appearing again and again. The manager chuckled, shaking his head. "Anyone can print numbers. Doesn't mean they're real." Jackson didn't argue. Instead, he pulled a single card from his pocket, placing it face up on the counter. His name printed in silver: Jackson Hale, founder and CEO, Hale Hospitality Group. The manager's smirk faltered. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Emily, standing a few feet away, froze mid-step. Jackson spoke again, his tone level, steady, impossible to dismiss. "I built this company so work would be rewarded fairly. Not stolen, not funneled to family. Every figure in that report is tied to your login. Every missing dollar leads back to you." Around them, the cafe grew quieter. A couple of customers turned to listen. Staff behind the counter stopped mid-motion. Even Tyler's hand slipped off the register. The manager tried to recover, forcing a smile. "Look, we can work this out." Jackson cut him off with just a glance. Not raised voice, not anger, just clarity. "Number, you've already worked it out for yourself. And it ends today." He tapped the folder once, firm against the counter. "Effective immediately, you are suspended. Her and internal investigations will handle the rest. Security will escort you out." Emily's hand went to her mouth, eyes wide. Tyler stammered something under his breath, but no words formed. Jackson turned toward Emily, holding her notebook carefully, like it was evidence and testimony at the same time. He handed it back to her. "You were right to write it down. Don't ever think you were invisible. Not to me." The cafe was silent, except for the hum of the espresso machine. The man who thought no one would ever look had just been exposed, and everyone in that room now saw him for exactly what he was. The manager didn't argue again. He looked around, searching for someone to back him, but the staff, who once stayed silent, were no longer on his side. Even Tyler, his own nephew, stepped back from the register, hands shoved deep in his pockets, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Jackson remained steady, his voice calm but unmistakable. "This isn't about one cafe. It's about trust. And trust isn't negotiable." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Confirm suspension. Lock access to all 3 accounts immediately." On the other end, the response was swift. "Confirmed." Within seconds, the POS terminal flickered. A new login screen appeared, different from the one the staff had seen for months. The hidden tiers were gone, the override functions stripped. The screen now showed what it was supposed to show: equal distribution across every server logged in. Emily stared at it, unable to hide her disbelief. For the first time since she had been hired, the system was fair. The numbers added up. Jackson turned to her. "You don't need that notebook anymore," he said quietly, almost like an aside. "But keep it. A reminder of why speaking up matters." "Oh." Her eyes watered, but she nodded firmly, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. Jackson shifted his gaze to the rest of the staff. "From today, every tip is transparent. Every role will be reviewed, and the people who actually do the work will see it reflected. No more invisible lists. No more hidden access." The younger trainee who had struggled at the register earlier raised her hand slightly, uncertain. "Does that mean I'll be allowed to log tips too?" Jackson's expression softened. "Yes. Everyone who works earns their share. No one gets to decide otherwise." A weight seemed to lift across the cafe. Employees exchanged glances, relief, maybe even hope. The silence, that once felt suffocating, now broke into murmurs, small but real. As for the manager, 2 mall security guards had arrived quietly. Jackson didn't need to say anything more. The man's face had already drained of confidence. He followed them out, his tie still straight but his authority gone. Jackson stayed a moment longer, not as a show of power, but to make sure the staff understood. "Listen carefully. A restaurant can survive slow sales. It can even recover from a bad review. But when the people who hold it together start to believe the system doesn't see them, that's when it dies. That ends here." Emily lowered her eyes, then raised them again with a steadiness he hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she whispered. Not as a plea, as recognition. Jackson gave her a small nod. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You refused to disappear." Behind the counter, the new tip distribution screen glowed softly, reflecting across the glass. For the first time, it told the truth. And for the first time, everyone could see it. The cafe looked different now, even though nothing physical had changed. The chairs were the same, the neon lights still buzzed, and the air still carried that faint mix of coffee and fryer oil. But the atmosphere had shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, the people behind the counter felt seen. Emily wiped down a table near the window, her movement still precise but lighter, almost like the weight she carried had loosened. The trainee who once struggled at the register was now logged into the POS on her own, her screen reflecting an equal share of tips for the orders she processed. She double-checked the numbers twice, then smiled when she realized nothing had been taken. It was all there. Jackson watched quietly, arms folded as he stood near the corner. He didn't need to stay, but he wanted to see it. Not just the removal of corruption, but the return of something more fragile: trust. A customer approached Emily and left a few dollars on the tray. She picked them up, hesitated out of old habit, then glanced at Jackson. He gave a slight nod. She slipped the money into the jar herself, no one taking it away. A small act, but one that felt monumental. Tyler hovered near the back, uncertain, stripped of the power he had once flaunted. Without special access, he was just another employee, required to serve tables like everyone else. His slick hair and polished shoes looked out of place now, and the realization showed in his nervous glances. The manager would be facing a full audit and formal investigation, but Jackson didn't linger on him. The bigger issue wasn't one man, it was the system that had allowed him to hide. That was what Jackson had to fix, not just here, but across the chain. He pulled out his phone once more, opening the line to Mara. "Expand the audit to every location," he said. "No exceptions. If they're clean, good. If they're not, I want every number, every role assignment, on my desk." "Already in progress," she replied. Jackson ended the call and let his gaze fall back to the floor. It struck him then, the irony. He had built Hale Hospitality with the idea that no one would feel invisible. Yet it wasn't until he sat in a plastic chair under buzzing mall lights, disguised as a stranger, that he finally saw how invisible some of his best people had become. He picked up his coffee cup, now cold, and set it back down again. Then he spoke. His words meant not just for the staff, but for the camera, for anyone listening. A business doesn't collapse when profits dip. It collapses when the people holding it together stop believing they matter. You can survive a bad quarter. You can recover from slow sales. But when your best people feel unseen, that's what kills you from the inside out. Emily looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she didn't look down right away. She stood a little straighter, her shoulders squaring. Jackson saw in her not just an employee, but the embodiment of what he had almost lost, a reminder that fairness wasn't a policy to be printed, but a commitment to be lived. He turned to leave, his footsteps steady against the tiled floor. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence behind him. Emily folded the notebook she once guarded like proof of survival and slipped it back into her apron. Not because she still needed it, but because it now symbolized something different. Not invisibility, resilience. As Jackson stepped back into the mall's crowded walkway, his voice lingered in the narration, calm and clear. Fairness isn't a favor. It's a promise. And it starts again, every single day. The cafe door closed behind him, leaving a room that finally felt honest. And for Emily, for the trainee, for every worker who had been silenced, that honesty was worth more than any tip could ever be. News of what happened at the cafe didn't stay quiet. It rarely does. Within 48 hours, word spread across Hale Hospitality's internal network. Employees talked in break rooms, messages circulated in group chats, and suddenly every branch manager knew. The CEO had gone undercover, and someone had been caught. Jackson didn't release a press statement. He didn't need to. Instead, he let the audit speak. Every location in the chain received a notice mandatory review of POS permissions, mandatory transparency of tip distribution. For the first time, hidden access logs were visible to everyone. Some branches passed without a problem, others didn't. And when the numbers came in, the pattern was undeniable. Certain managers had learned to exploit the system, shaving tips under the guise of processing fees. Not all of them were as bold as Branch 47, but the damage was there. Dozens of employees who thought they had been unlucky with shifts or customers now saw the truth in black and white. Emily's story, though unnamed, spread quietly. Staff whispered about a worker who had tracked every missing dollar in a notebook, who stood up without ever raising her voice. She became a symbol not of weakness, but of persistence. In group chats, employees started saying things like, "I'm going to keep my own notebook too, just in case." The culture was shifting, not through fear, but through awareness. Jackson read every audit summary. Some nights he stayed in his office long after the lights in the city dimmed, reviewing numbers that told stories of betrayal and neglect. But for every fraudulent report, there were 10 branches where the system worked as intended. And in those, he saw the proof that fairness could hold. When he finally spoke to the leadership team, his words were simple. "We don't need slogans on walls. We need accountability in systems. If we can't guarantee that, we don't deserve the people who work for us." No applause followed. Just silence, heavy but agreeing. Back at the food court cafe, life went on. Customers ordered coffee, trays slid across counters, neon lights flickered. But the staff carried themselves differently. Emily no longer hunched her shoulders. The trainee no longer shook at the register. Even Tyler, stripped of special access, now wiped tables like everyone else. The scandal had begun with one stolen tip. It ended with a company looking at itself in the mirror. Weeks passed, but the impact of that single cafe visit didn't fade. In some ways, it grew stronger. Audits were still rolling out, numbers still being checked. But the real change wasn't in spreadsheets. It was in people. Emily kept working at the food court cafe, but now her presence felt different. Customers noticed the way she carried herself steady, professional, but no longer cautious. She smiled more. Not the nervous smile of someone trying to hide frustration, but a genuine one. When she dropped off a tray at a table, she no longer glanced toward the register in fear of who might take the money. She knew the tips she earned would reach her. One evening, after closing, she pulled out her notebook, the one that had once been filled with red circles and missing numbers. She flipped through it, page by page. For the first time, the last few days showed nothing to circle. Every entry balanced perfectly. She let out a small laugh, then closed it for good, sliding it into her locker. The notebook had served its purpose. It was no longer survival. It was history. For the trainee, the story was similar. She now logged into the POS on her own shift, her name on the screen beside the orders she processed. The numbers matched. She grew more confident, faster, sharper. Customers began requesting her by name. A few even left notes on receipts, thanking her for the service. As for Tyler, the nephew who once had unchecked access, his days looked different too. No longer shielded by his uncle's authority, he was expected to work like everyone else. He wiped tables, carried trays, learned what it felt like to stand on his feet through a full shift. Some coworkers still distrusted him, but even that distrust had value. It reminded him of the ground he had lost, and maybe, just maybe, of what it meant to earn something instead of having it handed to him. Jackson didn't return to the cafe immediately. He didn't need to. His presence had already been felt. Instead, he received updates from Mara and the audit team. Branch by branch, the results poured in. Some revealed small discrepancies. Others uncovered deeper issues. But everywhere the system was corrected, the same pattern appeared. Employees worked harder, not because they were scared, but because they finally believed the company was fair. Late one night, Jackson stood in his office, looking out across the city. The skyline glowed, but his thoughts stayed with the food court cafe, with the girl who had whispered the truth into the noise of a crowded morning. He thought about the silence of customers who had looked away, the arrogance of a manager who thought no one would notice, and the strength of one employee who refused to accept invisibility. He picked up his phone, recorded a short message, and sent it to the leadership team. His voice was calm, even, the same tone he had used at the counter weeks earlier. A company doesn't succeed because of branding or ads. It succeeds because the smallest voices are heard. Emily's notebook wasn't a complaint, it was a reminder. If we ignore reminders like that, we lose everything. The message ended there. No slogans, no speech, just truth. Back at the cafe, Emily finished another shift. She stepped outside into the cool evening air, apron tucked under her arm, notebook left behind in her locker. For once, she didn't feel the need to carry proof. She looked up at the night sky, exhaled, and walked toward the bus stop with shoulders light. Her world hadn't become perfect. The work was still hard, the hours still long, the pay still modest. But something fundamental had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. And that, for her, was worth more than any paycheck. A month later, Jackson returned to the food court cafe. Not undercover this time, not to test or to confront, just to see. The neon signs still buzzed, the smell of coffee and fryer oil lingered, and customers shuffled in and out with shopping bags. On the surface, nothing had changed. But to those who worked here, everything had. Emily was behind the counter, smiling easily as she handed a coffee to a customer. The trainee was now confident at the register, chatting with guests while her screen displayed tips that matched exactly what customers left. Even Tyler was there, carrying trays and wiping tables, his head lowered, learning the rhythm of real work. When Emily spotted Jackson near the entrance, her expression shifted, not fear, not nervousness, but recognition. She gave a small nod, like one professional to another. Jackson returned it, silent but warm. He didn't stay long. He didn't need to. He saw what he had come to see, A place where people could finally believe the system was fair. A place where silence was no longer survival. Outside, he paused near the glass doors, the same spot where weeks earlier he had walked away disguised as a stranger. Back then, he left with a cold coffee and a notebook full of missing numbers. Now, he left with something else, entirely proof that leadership wasn't about presence, but about principles that held, even when no one was watching. As he walked into the crowd, his voice carried over the scene in a quiet reflection. I went in undercover to find out how one branch treated the people who kept it alive. What I found was a system that stole from the very hands that worked the hardest. But one voice, written in a notebook, reminded me why we built this company in the first place. Fairness isn't a slogan. It isn't a speech. It's the daily act of making sure the invisible are finally seen. You don't fix that with money. You fix it with integrity. Every shift, every transaction, every day. Oh. Back inside, Emily wiped down a table and tucked a few dollars from a grateful customer into the jar herself. No one stopped her. No one took it away. For her, that simple action meant more than any headline or audit could ever capture. The camera of memory lingered there, the jar reflecting the glow of the overhead lights, her quiet smile steady, her work finally acknowledged. And with that, the story closed the way it began. A cup of coffee, a small act, and a truth that could no longer be ignored. Because sometimes the biggest changes don't start with a press release or a boardroom. They start with a notebook, a whisper, and the courage to believe that fairness still matters.